So at this point, I'd like to talk about our digital manufacturing and digital twin concepts. And we're looking to be able to do further advancements with NIAR and their new Atlas Center with some of this technology. So we'll talk later about that. But I'm calling this sort of the composite circle of life, where we can be studying materials as incoming materials in the design and understanding side of things, all the way up through manufacturing, and then being able to do structural health monitoring on vehicles in the long term, either through manufacturing process, in structural test, and throughout the life of the vehicle. So we're going to be talking about in situ NDE quality. So this is where we're able to measure during the manufacturing process the in situ quality of components in real time. So you can be making good parts every time. Our digital manufacturing allows us to do toolless manufacturing as well as guided assembly and bonding to drilling operations, click bond assemblies, all the different things, as well as alignment of components and checking all of this throughout the manufacturing process, as well as documenting it in the digital twin. And then being able to do structural testing and structural health monitoring on components so that we can truly understand the response of these materials throughout their life. And you saw in Waruna's presentation a broad variety of applications on real structures and how it could be really powerful in monitoring components throughout their lifetime. So in the composite build, in situ monitoring, we can be able to be building components even in a toolless way. The idea of being able to measure the 3D shape, deformations, the robot head location with incredible precision, as well as being able to look at the quality of the build, voids, disponds, things like that, as well as FOD and other kinds of foreign material. The digital twin, we can be doing a digital assembly of components, and we'll give a demonstration of that with Joe Horn, our lead engineering manager, to see how this kind of assembly can be done. And then in structural testing, the idea of being able to make measurements on an entire vehicle and really understanding the structural response of components in a really good and detailed way, as Waruna was showing, it's holistically on entire assemblies and being able to see how all the parts work together in a good way. And then in structural health monitoring, being able to monitor an entire vehicle and be able to compare that against its finite element model and be able to really do predictive maintenance, as well as validate the defect and its severity on the component. So as we saw before in the beginning, there's Aramis, our stereophotogrammetry capability. The idea of being able to track target dots, very simply with a test setup time, a fraction of wired sensors, or putting a pattern down and getting the full field response. The computer literally creating target dots continuously through that pattern. And to be able to validate those results in a really clean way to comparative models and be able to iterate those models in a good way, as Waruna was showing some of that work. Including in this case, the buckling of a fuselage panel, very similar to what Waruna was showing, but even large structural response of helicopters, as well as tooling and that kind of thing. So we talked about some of the applications within our NASA centers and that kind of application. Here's the IAD in the largest wind tunnel in the world at NASA Ames. And we had data all the way around this 25-foot diameter component during the wind tunnel measurements. At NASA Langley, they do drop tower tests regularly, and for about 15 years with our equipment. And here's an example of an entire helicopter getting dropped and understanding the structural response of the entire vehicle. Or just to be able to put target dots on a component and truly understand what's going on, even in very dynamic environments. In this case, we see a missile firing out of a rocket tube and looking at the roll, pitch, and yaw of the missile as it gains acceleration and control. That was down at Marshall, NASA Marshall. And Dr. Paul Gradle testing rocket motors at Stennis Space. You can see his Aramis systems studying something that is very cold and very hot simultaneously. So that was pretty cool. And that laid out tests as we talked about before. Let me get into digital manufacturing and the idea of being able to utilize stereo imaging systems in the manufacturing, not only quickly allowing the manufacturing steps to occur, but doing real-time quality control simultaneously. And so getting into in situ quality, the idea of hand layup guidance with our laser tracker, make sure you have ply placement and validation of that, as well as fiber alignment. And then we can be doing FOD detection. In this case, we can see a backing material under the ply, and some bridging that has occurred in this specific case. And be able to really make sure that each build is done fully and correctly, and be able to document every step of the way in a digital twin. And so for hand layup, we're checking for end of ply, fiber alignment, void and bridging, FOD, 3D shape to CAD, which in a tool maybe is not so important, but post-curing scans we do all the time, and bond quality and in thermoplastics will become very powerful. So in the composite hand layup, we're going to give laser guidance, fiber alignment, and do the cool scan NDE measurements. They're going to autoclave the component, and with the 3D scan, and then RVAT assembly, we can clean and energize robotically, do the adhesive beads, and do the QA checks. So all of this is captured in the digital twin during this process. And in AFP builds, we can see the real-time robotic layup, and a typical situation, here's just a single piece of tape, but you can see a void underneath. In this case, this was just a void from a previous layer buildup. But you can see gaps showing up as well as laps, all of it automatically analyzed and resulted in a complete analysis. And here we're looking at, again, detection of laps, gaps, twists, splice, buckling, voids, FOD, and even 3D stacking of the defects in a structure, where a defect may be acceptable by itself, but stacked up, it would be a larger defect in 3D space. And here's an example of looking at one layer in our digital twin, and we can see the results of a specific defect here and the min-max values of it, as well as looking through the entire specimen and seeing, in this case, build voids. These are all acceptable, so they're yellow, but if they were stacking on top of another, they would be called out as concerns. So in the robotic build, we can track the robot head with incredible precision, especially when you get into larger structures and the robot is now on a gantry. Knowing the precise location of the robot head relative to the tool is difficult. We're tracking that in 6 degrees of freedom with very high accuracy. Then we're doing the in situ NDE at the same time, looking for lap, gap, twist, feeding all this back into the digital twin in 3D space. So we are tracking all of this in complex 3D space. When we cure the specimen, we can then scan it, and again, RVAT assembly, clean, energize, and capturing all of this quality data in our digital twin. When we get into the robotic cleaning, we're using a robotic carbonic 3D cleaning method, which can go and clean the surface. We can then do a plasma energize, all robotically. And when this happens, we see the shear strength of the material increasing tremendously from a properly cleaned and prepared specimen. We're also working on coupling that with laser etching as needed. And then we can put out a very precise amount adhesive bond, and we can do what we call smart bonding. And in the smart bonding, we can choose the amount of adhesive depending on what is needed to potentially fill gaps between two components or be able to measure out exactly the amount of interface area that's going to be, so we get minimized squeeze out, even internal to the structure. And then with our scans, we can measure the bond line thickness of every component. Then when we get into digital assembly, we're again just scanning the component. And we're going to have a little demonstration of this in a bit. But we're using the Aramis sensor, so we're accurate down to better than 1/1000 of an inch. We're giving real guidance directly to CAD. So you're building to CAD rather than to a generic tool. And we've scanned the real part, so it's we're placing the real part rather than placing an ideal part. This is MRL9, so used throughout industry. We provide complete operator guidance. So you're getting precision guidance during the measurement, making it faster and easy to use. But in applications of, one of our big implementers early on was General Atomics. And they found that using RVAT, we were 60% faster than even using hard tooling. And quality control comes in automatically. You're using the same tool after curing to check the quality, and all of this is captured into the digital twin. So you're really doing this faster and more effectively than traditional methods. So we're doing using a dynamic reference, and so even if the component is flexing, we're still tracking that to its CAD. The CAD can even be moving in three-dimensional space as we're positioning it. And so it's on any complex 3D structure, and we're measuring in true 6 degrees of freedom. So we're watching how everything moves in a really precise way and capturing each of those build steps in the digital twin with the critical measurement points that are defined for each component. And we're capturing the as-built along with the scan and the CAD. So all of this is in the digital twin capture. Then we can do smart tools, and smart tools allow us to be able to do a variety of different steps. As an example, smart tool for drilling or for clip bond alignment or for even custom tools for doing alignments of components. You can turn any tool into a smart tool and track it, document it, and record it in the digital twin. When you get into drilling operations, this becomes really powerful. And here we can use our smart drill guide. And this allows us to be able to do 3D tracking of this and very high accuracy. And when it came to compared to traditional methods, it's 10 times faster. So literally to be able to track this into position and drill your starting holes, as well as then change the guides out for different drill sizes. So you can do your pilot hole, your larger hole, and the reaming hole. Hugely faster, and you're documenting exactly in quality QA, as well as that digital thread, and capturing it all in the digital twin for full analysis. You can also do blind drilling. In this specific case, and we'll be demonstrating this today, where just taking a composite panel where it knows there's a hole in the structure down below, and you can do a blind hole drill right into that structure because the system knows where all the components are. And this makes your team using traditional methods way faster and more effective than you currently are. And be able to even do checks to see what gaps are for smart adhesive bond, or feeding back to engineering and saying, hey, we got a little problem here. But the field people will have really powerful information to feed back to assemblies. And looking at all the critical checkpoints, see if they're all in alignment or not, and be able to check, this is the kind of quality checks you get, as well as feeding it into QA management, automatically getting reports, and being able to buy off on specific issues automatically and rapidly, effectively in real time. And an alignment tool to do a drilling guide for specific applications and how these were put into position and checked to make sure they're all in alignment as per the requirement with the QA checks. And so we're applying this digital twin concept to be able to understand the CAD drawings, component scans, engineering data, assembly data, and the QA review data, all put in together, and capturing all these digital threads into our digital twin document. And so then you can be able to graphically look at an entire vehicle and be able to dive into, say, the wing, and be able to see how the components are of that was built, and the entire tree of information associated with every component that is in that assembly, from the materials, 3D baseline, assembly data, and then NDT, and capturing all of this information in the digital twin. But it can also be used, this information, especially the strain measurements and displacement measurements and alignments, for long-term structural health monitoring. You have this all in the database. So now you can be monitoring structures through structural test, as well as through final assembly and into the vehicle. Here's an example of our digital twin and how the graphical interface works, and in this case, some reporting and tracking all the components with our QR coding method. So our digital twin server utilizes the RVAT data coming in situ measurements coming in, structural health monitoring coming in, as well as the QR codes, which automatically, optically define the component serial number, and all the data that it links it all together. And then we can be bringing in, the engineering data and your production data all into the general server, and this with the agents bringing all this together into one set of data, and then be able to do the analytics on this, which then provides the true data to the RVAT digital twin. The web server can then send out, gives a nice solid GUI and reports, but the RVAT digital twin server can then generate reports to your customers, your service team, FAA as needed and as appropriate. So getting into structural testing, we talked about the structural testing on the James Webb Space Telescope. Literally a 3-month program, completely paid for the equipment 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and it's still working day in and day out for free. Structural testing on the at Boeing, one of our very best customers, so that's all really good. And here's just some example strain measurement on a component, looking at displacements during structural test. And then getting into structural health monitoring. One of the early things we did more than 10 years ago was we patterned a jet engine turbine blade set, and those blades went into a hot section of a jet engine. Now, normally we use paint to do patterning, but in this case, we sputtered on a ceramic coating. And the ceramic coating survived for a year in the hot section of a jet engine, and we're able to get this data, which shows the creep strain on the blade. And this data was never been gotten before. And so really unique. It invalidated one of their models and validated another model, and is now a traditional method. Every new engine, they do the same test for. But this just gives you an example of being able to monitor structures over the long time and understanding creep events and other kinds of results. One of the things we're working on right now is developing the method to be able to do this on entire vehicles or on large structural components like wings and box beams, that kind of thing. But with our equipment, we found that we can detect even barely visible damage in composite structures and be able to locate that with great precision anywhere on the aircraft and with a rapid inspection. We can then couple with our thermography and be able to do check the composite to make sure the extent of any damage. So actually with barely visible damage work we did at General Atomics, we found that there was no damage to the basic level of the lowest level of barely visible damage that they provided us. But the Aramis still picked it up as a little dent, but there was no delamination by the thermography. Increasing the load, we created a little bit larger defect, and then we started getting delamination. And so this gives you a sense of how that could work. So Aramis is the first line of measurement, and we coupled with that quickly check the extent of damage as needed with the thermography. When you get into structural health monitoring of more advanced vehicles, the need for being able to do a full field optical measurement and optical structural health monitoring. It's the same thing as doing visual inspection, but it's really enhanced visual inspection. But it has the power of literally trillions of strain gauges across the structure. And it's a really powerful tool now and in the future. We talked about some of the applications. Typically, with GM on their stamping operations, we're saving them $100 million a year with a $2 million investment. And, typical scenario, over and over again, we hear, it's a 30-day of use return on investment. These sound all really powerful, but at Boeing, the real capabilities is the cost savings is 10 times cheaper than traditional methods. And that's even assuming the entire acquisition of our equipment. The manpower savings is 50 times better. So instead of 2 weeks preparing to run a test, you can be preparing in a couple hours at the most. And 100 times more data allows you to see the problems in your structure where the traditional methods are only looking where you think you have a problem. So you can get insight in the overall response of the structure. So in this transparent manufacturing capability, it allows us to go faster to market, higher productivity and efficiency, being able to be literally in many cases 10 times faster than your traditional methods especially on complex 3D components, and be able to just produce a higher quality product. That's the critical component of all of this stuff, and be able to make things less expensively and more effectively. If we can be getting rid of some of the tooling in lesser volume applications, many times tooling is 40% of the cost of an aircraft program. And then be able to have complete FAA certification by showing them every step that you've captured and every piece of information, showing the quality and that you're following your own procedures. And then be able to do structural health monitoring on these vehicles for the life of them, and be able to have life extension and preventive maintenance, critical components. Thank you all very much. And I think at this point, I think we'd like to start giving if anybody has any questions, and then we can switch over to Joe Horn for a demonstration.